Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bill Monroe with the Strokecast. I'm here today to talk about a few things, including Fast and Be Fast. This past Monday was World Stroke Day, and it was awesome to see so many people talking about stroke awareness and their own survivor stories, both on Facebook and on Twitter, and in general in other places. And lots of new things got announced. I saw NeoFect announce their Indiegogo campaign for their new glove to help folks who have hands that are experiencing paralysis actually use them to grip, which is really cool to see that product coming out. Maggie Whittam also went ahead and announced the crowdfunding campaign for her new movie, and we're going to learn a lot more about that this Friday when my interview with her drops in the Strokecast feed. So be sure to check that out. You'll be able to find that at strokecast.com in your favorite podcast apps, as well as in this group here. But that will show up on Friday morning. So there have been a couple other things going on. I talked with the Washington News Service for World Stroke Day about my own story and about this event, and about, again, looking out for the warning signs for stroke and some of the ways to potentially avoid stroke. So that was available for radio consumption throughout the state of Washington. And you'll also be able to find that over at strokecast.com/media, where I will make that interview available, or that story available, later today. So that will be there. And I believe you'll also find a link to it on this page as well. So lots of stuff here, and lots of stuff that we're talking about in as many different places as possible. So definitely some great things to check out. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today was Fast and Be Fast. You see this a lot. You see this in my headers. You see this posted around hospitals. These are the warning signs to look out for stroke. And anyone who's listened to me for a long time has heard me talk about FAST: face, arms, speech, time to call 911, face drooping, arms drooping, speech slurred, all possible signs of stroke, and it's time to call 911 and get to the hospital as quickly as possible, preferably via ambulance, because an ambulance will be able to start treatment in the ambulance, which is where stroke treatment really goes, and they'll be able to get you to the right hospital as quickly as possible and be in communication with the hospital staff. So the triage process goes a lot more smoothly as well. So that is an important element of that. And FAST is what the American Heart Association talks about. You'll find references to FAST, face, arm, speech, and time, on the American Heart Association's website, the American Stroke Association website. Around Seattle, you'll even find it on bus signs traveling around the city. So it's awesome to see that level of awareness. And in fact, my stroke, when it presented itself, it was classic FAST symptoms. But one of the things that's happened is that as we've had more awareness, and as we've talked more and more about the FAST signs and the FAST symptoms, is that many stroke survivors report not experiencing those, not having problems with their face, their arms, or their speech necessarily, or at least those not being their primary symptoms and their primary challenges. So what Swedish Medical Center has done, and other hospitals in the Seattle area and around the country really, have begun modifying FAST and talking about Be Fast, BEFAST. The B stands for balance, the E for eyes or vision challenges, which are designed to really capture more stroke symptoms. So if you find yourself having sudden balance issues, or especially balance issues to one side, or you find that your vision suddenly cuts out, or maybe half your vision cuts out, or your vision switches all into double vision, or all these different other weird neurologically influenced vision defects pop up, those are also potential stroke signs. And it's important to, again, get to the hospital as quickly as possible for treatment, as quickly as possible to minimize long-term disability. So you're starting to see more folks talk about Be Fast because it does cover more symptoms and more possible strokes. The American Heart Association has not adopted Be Fast, And I think in part that's the conservative nature of the organization, which is, fantastic. We want these organizations to operate somewhat conservatively and to make sure that the research and the science bears that out. So these are not things to change lightly or to transform lightly. And FAST in and of itself also has some advantages, even though it doesn't cover every possible stroke. My professional life is as a corporate trainer, helping people to understand products, helping people get excited to use and to sell products, depending on the audience that I'm talking with, whether I'm there as just a corporate trainer or whether I'm there specifically as a sales trainer, training channel partners, and all sorts of things like that. But the advantage FAST has over BFAST is that it is shorter and it's simpler. And I think it's important there as we look at these different ways of educating people about stroke, and especially stroke as it impacts young people, is that what's most important is that they remember something, is that they remember some of these details. And maybe for some folks, it's a lot easier to convey the message around FAST and to just learn face, arms, speech, and time, as opposed to learning balance, eyes, face, arms, speech, and time. Telling people to be fast is also a very simple acronym, but FAST in and of itself definitely has the advantage of being a faster, no pun intended, message to convey, something that's easier to stick with folks. So there's a lot of advantages to that, using that shorter messaging. And I know as a trainer that those short, simple messages that you can repeat again and again, fast, face, arms, speech, and time, are the things that people are going to retain. Because ultimately, after you talk to folks, you want them to retain what you've told them. That said, I'm personally still a fan of the more comprehensive BFAST, but regardless of which one, it's important to realize that the FAST and BFAST are not diagnostic criteria. They're warning signs intended for the general public, intended to know when you should call an ambulance, when you should get somebody to the hospital as quickly as possible. Not all strokes are going to manifest with classic FAST symptoms or even with BFAST symptoms. And when you get into the hospital, these are not going to be the primary ways of determining whether or not somebody has had a stroke, because there are other things that can inspire various combinations of these things. They're intended to be that warning, to be that indication to get there that something is seriously wrong here and something really needs to be taken care of as quickly as possible. But once you're actually in a hospital context or in an emergency room context, then there are other neurological tests that they can do. They'll often go ahead and monitor your blood pressure, because one of the things that happens when you have a stroke is you often see blood pressure spiking quite a bit, either because the blood is leaking out someplace in the brain or because the blood is getting stopped from reaching some spot in the brain and then is not getting back to the heart in the right way. So blood pressure can be an indicator, and there are other things that can be indicators as well. But the classic indicator, or not, I suppose classic is the wrong term, but sort of one of the most popular indicators or most comprehensive indicators, let me put it that way, is actually going to be through medical imaging, through going through the CT scan, through going through the MRI to actually see the issues that are in place. And it's another thing that's important to realize too, is that the CT scan is not always going to show it. When I went into the hospital, my first CT scan that morning didn't show anything wrong, even though I was fully in the throes of symptoms. A couple hours later, they put me through the MRI, and it was perfectly clear on the MRI what was going on. So an MRI is going to be a more comprehensive versus CT with or without imaging. It's helpful to note that later that night, so probably about here I am getting caught up on the numbers that I shouldn't be getting caught up on in the same way, but about 16 hours later, the CT scan they did then showed the damage, obviously from the stroke. But that is the stuff that's going to be more comprehensive and more definitive in evaluating the presence of stroke. FAST and BFAST are going to be important signs, things to look for. and things that should tell you that when you call 911 or get to the emergency room, that you should be thinking stroke as a civilian and as a potential patient or as a caregiver or as a relative who's just accompanying somebody, to let them know that they should be looking for that this is definitely a possibility. You want to make sure that gets on folks' radar about that. One of the other interesting things that isn't really captured by that is I've heard a number of stroke survivors have reported that their stroke manifested not just in those types of things, but in the single worst headache they've ever had in their entire lives. And that's something I hear more commonly with survivors of hemorrhagic strokes, bleeds in the brain, where they find themselves having an injury or a blood vessel ruptures or an aneurysm ruptures, and now they've got blood in the brain, and that will often lead to significantly weirdly painful headache, worst of their lives, which is also not really captured by Fast or Befast, but is another possible symptom, a possible warning sign of a stroke. So that is one of those things that is going to be very important to keep in mind. And that's the thing, Fast and Befast, they're not going to cover everything. They're just not. They are going to cover a lot of things that might otherwise not be covered. And as people discuss, should we be talking about Befast? Should we be talking about Fast? You know, we have to be very careful not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We don't want to get too sidetracked by finding the perfect analogy and the perfect way of approaching it, when what really matters is getting more than we're getting today, getting more awareness than we have today, getting more people to the ER faster than we are getting them there today, identifying more strokes and more potential strokes earlier on than we are doing so today. And Fast and Befast both do an excellent job of that. And it's something that really doesn't get the attention we need, and something that those of us who are in the advocacy space for greater stroke awareness and greater stroke resources in the community, or those in the medical fields who encounter Fast and Befast messaging all the time, something we really need to keep in mind is that not everybody experiences this. In fact, many of you listening to this may not have really encountered Fast or Befast messaging before, face, arm, speech, time, or balance, eyes, face, arm, speech, and time. I found a surprising to me number of stroke survivors that when I talk about Fast, when I talk about making sure that friends, relatives, colleagues know about Fast, that they, even survivors, really don't know what these things are. And it's even more important to us. First of all, obviously, we have a much more personal connection to these symptoms than the general populace does. But the other aspect of it is that once you've had a stroke, you are also more likely to have a second one, which makes it even more important that the folks around you and the folks in your life know what they should be looking for to be aware of stroke and to be concerned about the possibilities of that stroke, to know face, arm, speech, and time. But most folks don't know that. This is something I encounter in not just stroke-related activities, but in a lot of other areas of life too, and that many folks do, and we just don't think about it. A lot of the things that are obvious to us, because we spend time talking about them, or because it's part of our career, or because it's part of our hobby, are not obvious to the rest of the world. When you live and breathe something, when you make it a part of your life every day, that you are talking about this stuff, or you are encountering this stuff, or you are dealing with this stuff, it's very easy to assume that other people have that same or similar base of knowledge as well. And they don't. You know, and I can talk about things like podcasting, and it's easy to forget that a lot of people don't know what a podcast is. A lot of very talented, very smart, very successful people who use an iPhone, who have a podcast app right on their phone, don't know what it is, and they've never used it. It doesn't mean they're dumb. It doesn't mean anything like that. It means that it hasn't been a part of their life in the way that it has been for me. And when I find this when I help coach people in public speaking, is that things that seem obvious to me as a speaker, they just don't know. They just don't have the experience. They just don't have the background. And again, they haven't lived it. They haven't pursued it. They haven't dived deep into it in the way that I have. This happens to all of us. We become very knowledgeable about something we're passionate about, or something we work on, or something that just takes a lot of time in our lives. And when we become passionate about it and knowledgeable about it, we assume that the most basic fundamental stuff in that area is stuff that everybody knows about. It's so obvious to us. How could somebody not know it? And that's the thing. We've become so familiar with it. It's become so basic to us because of our passion and because of our continuing knowledge of that we just assume everybody knows, and they don't. They haven't given it the time. They haven't given it the focus that we have for whatever reason. It's why we can look at various stroke support groups and various conversations that are happening out there. And folks ask about, things like, why can't I open my fist? Why don't my fingers respond? Why is my fist so tight today? That we know, well, tone and spasticity, that's obvious. It's not. A lot of folks just don't encounter it. And unless they've been taught this, they're going to have those questions, and we have to be willing to answer them. A lot of folks who, for whatever reason, just haven't focused on the fast symptoms because either it's never been told to them, or maybe it was all over the place when they were in the hospital recovering from their first stroke. But I know when I was recovering from my first stroke, there was a lot of things going on that I was not paying a whole lot of attention to. I was kind of distracted by my brain trying to kill me. And it's one of those things where we just might not have encountered that. So this week, we kicked it off with World Stroke Day. And the best way that you can go ahead and continue to support World Stroke Day is to make sure that you know the FAST and the BFAST messaging. Face, arms, speech, and time, or balance eyes, face, arms, speech, and time. And that you make sure the folks around you, whether that's going to be the folks in your personal life or the folks in your work life, know what the warning signs of stroke are, that they know to be fast, they know they need to be fast and take care of these things if that happens to you again, or if that happens to anybody else in the environment. Because again, getting to that ER as quickly as possible is critical. The best way to make sure that happens is to make sure that everybody around you knows what to look for. So those are some thoughts on Fast and BFast. I hope this has been a fantastic week for you so far. Hope you're having a great Halloween evening. And yeah, have a great time. And be sure to check out the latest episodes of Strokecast over at strokecast.com. And as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you again.